Trust. I welcome you all into this online session. Greenwork Trust is a Mumbai-based organization, and we strongly believe that nature education and awareness are the are must to create to create a larger impact. And even during this lockdown period, we are continuing our nature awareness campaign through these online sessions. So without wasting much time, I'll come to our today's topic. As you can see on your screen, it's about an introduction to coral reefs. And today we have Mr. Tanmay Wagh. He is a marine biologist by profession, and he he's may he has been working in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands for last 7 years. His research interests are understanding coral reef ecology and reef fishes, and in the past he has worked on projects related to coral reefs, fisheries and seagrasses, and sharks as well. So I would request Tanmay to unmute his mic and we can start with the session.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? And is my screen visible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Your
Okay.
voice is very clear.
Okay. Hello. Thanks for asking me to give this talk. So, as it is very obvious from the name, I'll be talking a little bit about coral reefs. So this will be a very a very broad and very introductory session. So we'll talk about what are corals, how they grow and reproduce, why are they so important to us, why have they received so much conservation focus, and like how every other system, why are coral reefs threatened, and is there something we can do as individuals apart from what scientists are doing or apart from what global efforts are being carried on. So I'm sure most of y'all have read about reefs or heard about reefs. Some of you might have even dived or snorkeled in reefs, maybe in Andaman, Lakshadweep, or in other places. So let's dive. Yeah. So before getting into the nitty-gritties of what makes a reef system, I would just like to take a step back and uh, get to the most fundamental question of what corals are, right? Are corals animals? Are they plants? Or are they just rocks? Because from the structure of corals, it's very difficult to gauge uh, what phylum or group they might belong to. So corals are largely animals, yeah, and you could also potentially classify them as minerals because they've been used for construction and other purposes for centuries. But in terms of living systems, we classify them as animals. And what you can see here, each individual unit that makes up a coral colony is called as a coral polyp. So a coral that you see usually is a network of various coral polyps joined together by a calcium carbonate skeleton. Yeah. So if we zoom in a little bit into the structure of the corals, what we see is something very similar to sea anemones or jellyfish, right? A crown of tentacles surrounding the mouth. And this is because corals belong to the same family as anemones called as coelenterata. Yeah, so as you might have guessed, tentacles play a very important role in trapping food. So the coral receives some of its nutrition from these tentacles. However, what is the really interesting thing about coral reefs is their association with an algae called as zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae. Yeah. So if we say zoom in to the polyp a little bit more, what we see is an algae or a group of algae which live inside corals. Now, what these algae do is that they carry out photosynthesis, right? So they're fixing sunlight and producing food, some of it which is received by the coral. Yeah. So the coral and the zooxanthellae live in what is called as a mutualistic symbiosis, which means an association in which both sets of organisms benefit from each other. Yeah, in this case, the coral colony receives its some of its nutrition from the zooxanthellae, or most of its nutrition from the zooxanthellae, and the zooxanthellae in turn get protection by living inside the coral tissue. Yeah. Now this evolution has been going on for almost 200 million years, and because of this, because of the large I think someone has their mic or speaker on. Yeah.
Sorted,
And
sorted.
because of this association, the bond is so strong that corals and the macroalgae, or the algae which live inside the coral polyp, cannot live without each other. Yeah. Now, the characteristic color that most corals get is due to the algal composition inside their polyps, right? So the same species can exhibit different. So, hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
different corals, so the same coral species can have different colors depending on the composition of zooxanthellae that lives within its tissues, right? So now that we know what makes a coral colony, it's also interesting to know how corals reproduce, right? Unlike most animals who reproduce only sexually, corals actually undergo both sexual and asexual reproduction. And both of these are extremely crucial in survival and growth of reef ecosystems. So it's fine if you can't read the things that I've written in this diagram, but as long as you can see, it's enough. So asexual reproduction in corals happens by a process called budding and fragmentation. These are two different processes, but both are asexual, right? So budding, if you can see the pink diagram at 5 o'clock position in this schematic, that shows how budding takes place. So essentially, once the coral polyp is grown or mature, it develops a bud from the side, right? This bud is essentially a smaller polyp. Now this polyp or the bud keeps on growing, and while it grows, it keeps on depositing calcium carbonate and forms an individual unit, very similar to what we had seen in one of the earlier figures. Yeah. Similarly, fragmentation happens when a piece of coral breaks away due to some sort of physical damage, say wave action or say cyclones or whatever. Right now, fragmentation is very similar to what we see in some plants. So if you break a rose plant or you cut a rose plant and replant it, there is a chance, not guarantee, there is a chance that it might grow into a full rose plant, right? So fragmentation is a very similar process in which there is a possibility that this fragment which has broken away from the main coral colony can actually settle down and also regrow as an individual coral. Now, however, asexual reproduction is very site specific, right? So budding or fragmentation is going to be a very localized thing. It will possibly help in growing the reef area or colonizing a nearby patch. But how do corals move around, or how is there connectivity between coral reefs from different areas? So this happens by asexual reproduction. So corals undergo a process called as coral spawning, in which a coral species is known to release gametes inside the water. Yeah. Now the fusion of male and female gametes results in the formation of a planula larva. The orange shell-like thing which you see in the diagram is the planula larva, and this larva can swim around with ocean currents, which carries it to much larger distances. Now, it's very interesting. Like, you would imagine corals to be animals where there's no communication, or where communication is very primitive. But the way this planula larva settles is strongly based on chemical cues. So it will keep on swimming in the water, grow in the process, and at a point where it realizes that, hey, there's a nice substrate here where I can settle, that is the point where the coral polyp, the planula will settle and develop into a polyp, and does restart the growth of a new colony. Now, the interesting bit with spawning is that water is a very, since it is an aqueous medium, the chances of male and female gametes combining is very less, right? To counter this, many species undergo a process of mass spawning, in which many individuals or many colonies of the same species are known to spawn at the same time, right? In the diagram you see here, the tiny dots that you see are actually coral spawns. And what mass spawning does is that it increases the chances of male and female gametes uniting to form the planula larva. Yeah. Now, interestingly, corals exist in a variety of different shapes, right? So we have plate corals, finger corals, staghorn corals, mushroom corals, and so many other forms to make identification or broad categorization easy. But the interesting bit is the same species of coral can also exist in different forms. And this is largely down to the physical environmental conditions in that place, the way current patterns are, or the way temperature is, light penetration is, the wave action is, and different things. So essentially, a same species can potentially exist as a branching form and can exist as a plate form. And this phenomena by which different coral species can exist in different forms is called as plasticity. Yeah, so all these different species of corals in their different forms with their different colonies continue secreting calcium carbonate, which they obtain from the seawater. And that is how an entire reef is formed. So reef is not essentially one species or one colony. It is a group of various other coral species, right? And along with corals or hard corals, we also have various other animal groups or plant groups, which give an important structural dimension to coral reefs. Yeah. So on the top left, we have soft corals. Besides it is calcified algae. Below we have sponges, the purple zoanthids, and algae. Right. These groups are very different from the corals that we spoke about just now, but all of them also play a very important role in forming the coral reef. So as I was talking earlier, we'll just go back to the initial diagram of the zooxanthellae and the coral polyp. Now, there is a common paradigm which says corals are known to grow only in nutrient-poor, clear, and warm waters. And this is largely down to the adaptations that zooxanthellae has, right? Because zooxanthellae have an optimal temperature of 22 to 29 degrees, because they need clear waters for photosynthesis, and because nutrient-rich waters mean more sediment, and that affects the process of photosynthesis. Corals are usually found in shallow, clear, and warm tropical waters across the globe. There are very few regions in temperate waters where we find coral reefs, and this is largely down to the very cold temperatures. So if you see right in the center of the map, we find the Great Barrier Reef system right along the east coast of Africa, and the Coral Triangle, which is the largest stretch of coral reefs in the world. It's believed to be the source of most coral communities and houses a lot of diversity and all of that. But if you go to the right side, what separates South America, not separates, but what is found between South America and North America is the Mesoamerican barrier system, which is the second largest barrier system in the world. Yeah, and if you go to the extreme left of your map, we find corals distributed along the east coast of Africa, as well as the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. So this is just the broad distribution of coral reefs throughout the world. And in India, also we find coral reefs. Most of them are around the Lakshadweep and Andaman Islands. That is because small islands are generally known to have more coral reef ecosystems around them. But we also have corals along the west coast of India, right? So Gulf of Kutch, southern Maharashtra to some parts of Karnataka. So the states of Goa, the districts of Sindhudurg, and places like Netrani in Karnataka are known to have very healthy corals. And we also find some reefs, not some reefs, like a large reef patch also in the Park Bay and Gulf of Mannar region. Now, why there's no reefs on the east coast of India is because the Gangetic Delta carries in a lot of sediment, right? And as we spoke earlier, corals need clear waters to grow. Yeah, so that is the reason why we don't find any reefs along the coasts of West Bengal, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, and also a large part of the Tamil Nadu coast. So, very often coral reefs are equated to rainforests, right? And just to build on that equation, what I'm going to tell you guys here is that it's not just the corals or the reef forming species that make the reef ecosystem. It's also a lot of other animals and plant groups which use the coral reefs as habitat. So like in a rainforest, you would expect not only trees, right? You would expect climbers, creepers, bushes, moss. You would expect reptiles, birds, mammals, uh, insects, so many different things. Similarly, coral reefs has all and probably more of these groups. Now, the interesting bit about coral reefs and why they're receiving so much importance is because in a largely homogeneous ocean floor, coral reefs are those few patches which create a lot of structural complexity. Now, what this structure does that it creates a perfect habitat for various fish species to live, right? So you have prey, and you have predator, and you have possibly breeding grounds that can exist in the same place. So coral reefs, which occupy less than 1% of the ocean floor, which is hardly anything, right? But they're home to one in every four marine species that we know of, which is massive, right? We know of at least 4,000 species of fish alone that are found in coral reefs, and many more are being reported almost every week. And whenever we speak about coral reefs or whenever we watch documentaries or movies related to coral reefs, a lot of focus is on species like turtles, snakes, sharks, manta rays, anemones, the charismatic ones. But coral reefs are also home to a lot of other equally or possibly even more interesting species, right? So if I go from the top left clockwise, we have flatworms, which are relatives of the tapeworms that infest mammal stomachs, which can regrow. If you cut a flatworm, there's a chance that it might regrow into a new adult. We have pipe fishes, which are relatives of seahorses, in which the male is known to carry the eggs. We have sea stars, sea cucumbers, nudibranchs, which are relatives of sea slugs. We have feather worms, shrimps, sea urchins, tunicates, sea fans, so many sea pens, feather stars, and so many other things, right? And this is probably not even half of the different kinds of groups that are found in reefs. So you can imagine the amount of diversity that reef ecosystems harbor. And while it is very easy to gauge how complex the marine food web or the reef food web must be, a very basic food web looks something like this, right? So you have corals and algae, which are the primary producers, and you go one step across trophic chains till you finally reach apex predators like groupers and sharks. Yeah, now while the sheer diversity and the abundance of life forms that they support is enough to understand the importance of coral reefs, this importance is magnified when we consider how important coral reefs are to human beings or us. So mostly along the coast of mainland India, we might not find that strong dependence on reefs. But as you go further into island systems and small countries, island countries, the importance of coral reefs is felt very strongly. So wherever we find coral reefs, we know that tourism industry and fisheries are the major sources of income and also nutrition. So we know of at least 1 billion people who are directly dependent on reef fish as a source of nutrition, which is massive, right? A lot of coastal communities receive their protein intake from coral reef fisheries. And in terms of income generated through tourism, we know that the Great Barrier Reef alone generates a revenue of $1 billion every year. So the importance of reef systems is massive, but the moment we cross, say, the aesthetic and the economic importance, we also get into why coral reefs are very important in sustaining life in certain places. So this, for example, is an island in Andaman, and you can see the reef edge and the point where the reef breaks the waves. Now, what this does is it prevents seawater from directly entering inland, right? So in an event where we have things like cyclones and tsunamis, coastal communities can be directly protected from the action of waves. And while protection is not the only advantage that they give, coral reefs also prevent salt water from entering inland. Now, this saltwater intrusion actually has massive implications to survival in island systems, right? Because most of these places are solely dependent on groundwater sources. There are no perennial rivers which flow in these parts. And the moment seawater enters, there's a chance that it mixes with your fresh water or your drinking water. And the moment that happens, an island is as good as uninhabitable. So barriers or natural barriers like coral reefs, mangroves, salt marshes are known to be extremely important in sustaining life on small island systems in particular, but also in most coastal areas. Now, other than protection, income, and nutrition, corals also play a very important role in cycling of nutrients like carbon and nitrogen. Uh, I won't get too much into the details of that, but they essentially play a very important role in balancing these cycles, right? They also are a very important source for novel drugs, not just corals, but a lot of animals living inside corals. So sponges, soft corals, hard corals, sea fans. We know a lot of these have been used to produce different types of medicines, which are used to treat humans. Now, as it has always been, the benefits that or the services that a system provides are often also a contributor to its major threats. So, coral reefs, despite being very important, are also globally threatened due to a variety of reasons, right? So we have threats ranging from local scales like boat anchorage, which causes physical damage, or discarded fishing gear, which can trap marine life, and also the problem of pollution. So sorry. So this image here, the one with plastic bottles, is from an uninhabited island in the Nicobars, right? And all the bottles that we see there are either from Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and all sorts of different countries. None from India, right? So the pollution that is produced in certain parts can actually have long-lasting impacts in certain areas, which might not be uh, producing those pollutants. And I'm sure it's the same for places like India. It's very likely that we might be finding Bisleris or Aquafina bottles in, say, Thailand or some other country. And as we broaden our scale, when we go to when we go to threats at a more regional scale or at a scale of a country, we're talking about things like sedimentation and effluents, often happening due to uncontrolled or unsustainable developmental activities near coral reefs. Now, what sedimentation does is something very similar to why we don't have coral reefs on the east coast of India, right? Because there is so much efflux of sediment into the water due to various construction activities, corals cannot photosynthesize because the algae or the pores or the polyps are all blocked. And over a period of time, the health of coral declines and corals gradually die. When health of coral declines and effluents are constantly being disposed in marine systems, it is also known to cause various disease outbreaks in the reefs. So this, for example, here is an example of a black band disease, which is caused by a virus. But we also have a lot of diseases caused by fungus, bacteria, and so on, right? We are all here, all of us sitting at home because of an infection that has spread due to humans coming in contact with the environment and getting exposed to viruses which we don't have natural immunity for. Something very similar is happening in reef systems, right? They are exposed to viruses and bacteria and fungi for which they don't have innate immunity, right? And the exposure is constant, and we have had massive disease outbreaks in Florida, in the Great Barrier Reef, and we know of these places probably because they've been documented. It's very likely that we have disease outbreaks in almost all reef areas of the world. And along with uncontrolled development is the problem of fishing, right? While fishing in itself is extremely important, right? There is no two ways about it. Fishing is an important source of income. It is an important source of nutrition to a massive number of people, as we have seen earlier. However, a lot of times fishing happens in very unsustainable or using very extractive or exploitative methods. And what this does is it not only depletes species, it also destroys habitat, right? Fishing gear like trawls are known to cause massive damage to reef systems. But the bigger player in all this is climate change, right? All these are fishing and sediments and trash and boat anchors and all of it are things that can be managed and, that can be controlled at a much more localized scale. However, when the problem becomes global, then we have something to worry about. So ocean temperatures, as you might know, have been rising for as long as we can remember. This year is a graph called as the hockey stick model. So we don't need to look too deep into it. We just need to go near 2000 or slightly before that, say the 1950s, where we've had a lot of industries coming up in Europe, America, Asia, everywhere. And we can see the growth in temperature after that, right, in 2000. And that's only till 2000. We are already in 2020. So whenever temperature rise, what happens is the zooxanthellae, which is living inside the coral polyp, leaves the coral tissue, or the coral tissue expels this zooxanthellae. We have spoken earlier about how zooxanthellae are very temperature specific, right? And the optimum temperature is, say, 22 to 29 degrees. But in most summers, at least in Andaman, we are seeing temperatures of around 31, 32, 33 degrees. So these are very high temperatures. And at those temperatures, corals expel their zooxanthellae. And unless temperatures fall back rapidly, the zooxanthellae don't return to their host coral, right? So what is left behind once the zooxanthellae leaves is essentially just the calcium carbonate skeleton. Now this is very similar to roads and walls, right? What happens in monsoons is that they get covered by algae. The same happens to bleached corals. Bleached corals are the corals which have lost their color because of algae, because of the zooxanthellae leaving. Now, bleached corals get rapidly colonized by algal communities. This is not the same algae as zooxanthellae. These are more larger and more complex species. And within a matter of few weeks, a reef can go from a bleached state to a state completely covered by algae. Now, the moment a reef gets covered by algae, it loses all its value, right? It loses its aesthetic beauty, so tourism industry suffers. It does not give the same amount of structure, so fish are less, so it affects income and nutrition. We don't. It is not a source of medicines anymore. And gradually, once reefs are colonized by algae, they also lose their structural complexity. And once reefs lose their structural complexity, there's also a reduction in the protective abilities of reefs. So you would expect seawater to enter more inland. And this is a very real threat that climate change has created to many small islands surrounded by reefs. Like, for example, in the Lakshadweep, where reefs form a very important barrier from seawater entering inland. Yeah, so however, we need to realize that reefs are also naturally resilient, right? There are natural mechanisms through which reefs do not go to this algal dominated stage and they can actually recover. And this is due to various natural controls. So I will just quickly talk about a small study that we had carried out in the Andaman Islands, where we were understanding how herbivore fish are contributing to recovery, right? So the fish here are, so we all know herbivore fishes are essentially fish which feed on plant matter. However, there are certain specific fish groups which feed exclusively on algae, right? These include parrotfish, like the pink one or the purple one here, or surgeonfish, which are the striped ones besides it, and many more species of these same groups. Now, what parrotfishes are doing or surgeonfishes are doing is that they're constantly feeding on algae, right? Now, their feeding action removes algae and exposes the bottom substrate of the reef, of the dead reef, right? Now, I want you to go back to the coral reproduction diagram that we had seen earlier. And we know that post-spawning events, the coral larvae is floating around in the ocean looking for ideal substrate for it to settle. Now, it is possible that the feeding action by herbivores is creating this substrate on which the coral recruit can settle. Recruit is essentially a polyp settling and forming into a slightly bigger coral, which can further grow in a process called recruitment. So by this example, we know that fish groups are directly helping recovery of reefs post any disturbances, right? And this is just an example of herbivores. We know of predators, we know of coral feeders, many other invertebrates, and almost all animal groups in corals having a very important role in promoting the recovery of reefs. However, like I said, like these are natural systems which can recover, but only if there is solid intervention from us, right? Coral reefs have become the poster child of climate change because uh, they are largely considered to be one of the first fatalities that we will see when global temperatures rise. However, we need not go to a stage where we are seeing coral graveyards. There is still a possibility of uh, promoting recovery through various ways, and the major way, as is very obvious, is controlling global emissions. Right? India, among many countries, is a member of the IPCC, which is and have decided to keep carbon emission levels below a certain point, which would reduce the growth of reduce the rate of temperature growth, which would potentially help not just coral reefs but various systems. But no one has fortunately complied to those norms. But at a more local scale, there are various things that can be done at a state level or at a country level to improve the health of reefs, right? Improving the health of reefs, what it does is it increases the chances of reefs to buffer the impacts of climatic disturbances. So we are giving corals better hope of, of surviving even as temperatures rise. So we have things like sustainable fishing practices. The ones here are examples of there's cast net on the left side and spear fishing on the right side, which are very selective fishing gear which don't destroy habitat. There is a lot of stress nowadays on the role of technology, right? Necessity is the mother of all invention, like they say. So in many places, scientists have been trying to artificially grow coral reefs, right? This is called as coral reef restoration. Yeah. So idea is to repopulate degraded patches of corals by planting or trying to grow new corals there, which would also gather fish communities because of the structure they provide. There have been attempts to literally inject coral colonies with antivirals and antibacterials to improve their resistance to diseases. There have been attempts to use things like sound to aggregate fish. So this soundscapes in coral reef ecosystems is a very new stream of research. What we know is that fish create a lot of noise, and a noisy reef is usually a healthy reef. So by artificially creating sound on a reef, you can potentially attract reefs. You can potentially attract fish to an area of the reef. However, all these, we need to remember that these solutions are only only to improve the health, and uh, recovery or resilience of corals is largely dependent on global efforts. However, there are a lot of things that we can do as individuals, right? You remember the earlier photo I showed you from the Nicobars, which had bottles from different countries. So any kind of pollution that we are generating, may it be plastic or I don't know, like paper, straws, so many things, can land, will very likely land in the sea, right? And there are so many things that we can do to prevent that, right? For example, consuming sustainable seafood. There are uh, initiatives in India called Know Your Fish and In Season Fish. You can check out their websites. They essentially recommend the kind of seafood one can consume in a particular season. So essentially, you're not consuming any fish during a fish's breeding cycle. So there is lesser natural stress or lesser human stress on fish populations. There are different groups which are involving citizens in exploring marine life. For example, in Mumbai, we have Marine Life of Mumbai, which take regular shore walks, right? And you don't always need these groups to go and explore your backyard. You can always do it on your own. But what I'm trying to convey here is that exposure to a system, or seeing the system, or observing it more creates a sense of responsibility towards protecting it. And most conservation or most research efforts are through scientists who have a genuine sense of belonging towards marine systems. And along with this, you can also participate in collecting data, right? So we have forums like iNaturalist in which individuals can record their findings. There is a very active community worldwide which helps you identify what you have seen. You see trends in those populations over the course. You can see if some species are increasing, some species are decreasing, and be part of the global movement to safeguard marine systems. And along with this, what we all know and what we've all been hearing is adopting greener lifestyles which are putting less stress on terrestrial systems or marine systems, right? It is not a switch, right? You can't switch to a green life from tomorrow. It takes a lot of tiny tweaks in our daily lives, which eventually lead to lifestyles which are much less harmful. And that is more or less it from my side. Yeah, these are few links I've added here, which are so sanctuaries.noaa and virtualreef.org are virtual reefs. So if you go on their websites, you can actually see different types of reefs. It's like diving in lockdowns. We also have the website of Marine Life of Mumbai, which has a lot of documented species from Mumbai shores, and there are many others, right? There's Marine Debris Tracker, which is an app in which you can feed in whatever debris you see. It might be along beaches, it might be if you're out boating or diving, and you see the amount of garbage that we find across the world and sort of contribute. And of course, iNaturalist that I spoke about. But essentially what I've been trying to convey with this is that very often it has been portrayed that all hope is lost and coral reefs are dying. There have been obituaries written about coral reefs, but I don't think that is true. And it is only through conscious effort, right from an individual level to a more global level, that these conscious efforts can only lead to, the best we can do is give the system a chance to recover, right? And we know in the past that coral reefs have recovered. So it is all about individuals and countries and states trying their best to conserve reefs and marine systems, because at the end of the day, it is us who are getting, the benefits of healthy systems. Yeah, so that's more or less from me. And I would like to thank Greenworks Trust for asking me to give this talk. If you would like, please support their initiative. And
thanks a lot,
can
Tanmay.
we take questions? Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So thanks a lot. This was a very informative session actually, and we'll just I'll just read questions from the chat box. So there is
Sure.
one question from Swarupa. So I think it's in regards with the east coast of India. Could it be also due to frequent storm on the east coast, the absence of reefs actually?
No. So on the east coast, we don't have reefs only because of the amount of sediment that the Gangetic Delta brings in. It's definitely because of that. Storms, for example, come to Andamans also every year, right? All the storms that hit the east coast are passing through the Andaman Islands, but we have a lot of healthy reefs there, so it's not down to just the east, just cyclones.
There is one more question by Diksha. She is asking, what do you mean by atoll and fringing reefs?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I didn't speak about it. So fringing reefs are essentially reefs which are an extension are contiguous to the landmass, right? So if you walk down the shore, you would gradually walk on the reef and reach the reef edge. Atoll reefs are these rings of coral coral structures, right? So if you see the map of Lakshadweep, you'll see the landmass and a ring of coral that forms around it, which is through years of uh, calcium carbonate deposition. Yeah. And barrier reef is what is found at a slight distance from the shore. So there's landmass, water column, and the barrier reef. This is how they differ.
There is one question from Ashok Thampi. Can you please repeat the reason for corals not being found in the Bay of Bengal? I guess you said it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll go for the next one. So, do artificial breeding coral reefs survive, and how much time does it take for them
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So the thing with artificial corals is they probably have a much faster growth rate than most natural corals. But that is only because we have succeeded in artificially growing only few species, right? We know of around 800 species worldwide, but I think we have not even been able to artificially regrow even 10%, right? So that is the first part. The second part is can they survive? So the answer is no, right? Whenever there's a bleaching event, if natural corals are dying, it is very likely that your artificial corals are also going to die. However, scientists in various parts are trying to isolate supercorals. Supercorals are essentially corals which have naturally high resistance to temperature changes, and trying to artificially regrow those and see if they have higher rates of survival. But again, like, it's never going to replicate a natural system. It is always going to be slightly like a plan B of sorts.
there is one question from Samrita. She's asking if possible, can you please explain again about the role of fishes in clearing algae and helping corals, and the
Yes.
steps following in which in it it in helping coral recovery.
Yeah. Okay. So, so we have certain fish groups, and I'm only talking about herbivores. There are a lot of others which play different roles, but we will not get into that. So herbivores are essentially fish which are feeding on algae, right? Now you might remember a bleached coral is rapidly covered by different types of algae. Okay. Now when the herbivore feeds on this algae, it is removing the algae from the reef uh, reef substrate, right? And what it exposes is a substrate which does not have algae growing on it. Yeah. Now this exposed surface is can potentially be a place where a coral larva can come and settle and start the recovery process. So it's essentially herbivore fish comes, feeds on the algae, exposed surface is formed, coral larvae which is swimming in the seas finds that exposed part, settles on it, and the coral colony grows again. I hope that answers your
Yeah.
question.
So, is there Gorgonia have any relation with corals?
So Gorgonia are part of this group called as ahermatopic corals, right? Hermatopic corals are reforming species, and ahermatopic corals are non-reforming species. So I think they are related at a larger family level, but in terms of structure, they are very different from each other.
Please
How?
tell
Sir,
me
how
again.
exactly corals are able to not entering the fresh seawater into the island? That is my first question. The second is, can coral be translocated successfully?
Okay. Uh, so the physical form of okay, yeah. So but different physical forms don't stop. The point I'm trying to make is the the entire structure which a reef creates forms a barrier, right? It might be branching, it might be plate-like, it might be any shape, but it essentially creates a barrier which reduces wave height and reduces the intensity which the waves would have otherwise struck the coast. So it's not down to any specific physical form, but it's down to the structure as a whole. I forgot your second question. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, but then that will help to not ingress seawater ingress into the groundwater. My question was particularly to the groundwater. That was first, and another one was, can coral be translocated successfully? Meaning there is a coral patch present in the say a marine habitat, and then there is going to be some project, industrial project is coming up, say maybe pipeline, transmission line, something of that sort, and they wanted that to be happen there only. So alternatively, what they thought of, they can remove the coral from that particular site and just place it besides it, say maybe 50-20 meters away. So can it be done successfully?
Yeah. So I don't think there have been attempts to I'll answer your second question first. I don't think there have been attempts to relocate reefs as a whole, because we are talking about massive areas, right? The Great Barrier Reef is the size of Germany. Yeah. And it is very likely that a couple of industries might destroy a very large part of this reef. So there is a limitation. And I feel alternatives need to be considered for things that we can potentially change from our side, right? I would assume it makes more sense to find a more suitable location for the industry rather than considering the possibility of translocating corals. It has not been done anywhere, but even if it is done, it is not going to have the same value. I don't see it working also. Yeah. Second question was the first question was about seawater entering groundwater. So essentially, if seawater enters inland, more inland than it usually does, it is going to get absorbed by the absorbed in the soil, right? And when it gets absorbed in the soil, there is a chance that it mixes with the groundwater resources. So then we have salty drinking water, which we can't drink, and that is the problem. That is what corals do. They create that barrier, so the distance that seawater travels inland is dramatically reduced. And yeah, so water bodies are not enthused with seawater.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess this answered the question of Sachi as well. How the
Yeah,
physical form of corals stop. Yeah. So there is one question: how much corals will be affected due to the coastal line projects, even after translocation process?
I think Gaurav can answer this better. But like I said, right, coral transplantation, not translocation. Transplantation is not the solution, right? It can be done at small scales. Yeah. So I don't know much about the Mumbai shore, but from whatever I've seen or read, we know for sure that there's a lot of diversity in that patch and a lot of small scale fishers which are directly dependent on that area. So I can't say how much corals will be affected, but I can definitely say that marine systems in that stretch will definitely be affected. Gaurav, do you want to add to this?
Actually, no. It's like, yeah, you answered it very correctly, because we haven't like documented the entire the corals we have in around Mumbai shores, which aren't completely documented, because maybe we started working like 3 years ago, and 3 years is pretty less time for a limited number of people. So yeah, we have documented in South Bombay, but in North Bombay we'll still plan to document, and let's see.
Yeah.
And there is one question. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. And it's not just a particular animal group that developmental projects affect, right? There's a lot of dependent people. There's a lot of other natural resources in that part which also get affected. So again, sorry, I missed the second part of your question. Will even after translocation process? So yeah, translocation or transplantation can be used only for smaller patches, right? You can't expect rampant development to happen and translocation to take care of the impacts that the development is causing. So that is not how translocation would work. You can potentially recover smaller patches. It's very good for genetic studies and isolating, creating a gene pool of corals, but not a solution for large scale damages.
There is one question, Twinkle. Which are the coral species selected for restoration projects?
Yeah. So for restoration, at least the stage at which we are now, most of the restoration happens using fast-growing species. So we have Acropora, yeah, which is a type of branching coral, which are shown in one of the slides. So that is widely used, but there have also been attempts to using other species like Montipora, Pocillopora, Porites, which are slightly larger species. So they also seem to be working fine in artificially uh, in artificial constructions as well.
There is one question from Nakshatra. She's asking, I didn't understand how a species of coral can have different physical features.
Yeah.
Nice question.
Yeah, nice question. So essentially, even I don't understand the exact exact system through which it happens, but is through the action of waves, through the action of currents, light penetration, and so on. A same species is known to exist in different forms. For example, in mangroves, if you see, the same kind of mangrove species can have different types of roots as a response to the environmental conditions in that area, and that is what creates this phenomena of plasticity in corals. Yeah.
There is one question from Dr. Seema Desai. She's asking, is coral reef diversity affect the indigenous species of fish and phytoplankton as well as zooplankton?
So I'm not sure what you mean by affect, but coral reefs do play a very specific role in the kind of fish community that we find in a particular area, because there are many species which are strongly reef dependent, right? Parrotfishes, groupers, surgeonfish, butterfly fish, all these forms are strongly reef dependent. So they definitely play a role in structuring reef communities. I think there is also some level of specificity in the plankton community around corals, but I'm not entirely sure about it. I can check and let you know.
There is one more question from Twinkle. Can you please share your thoughts on phase shifts in coral reefs?
So phase shifts in coral reefs are actually quite of various different kinds. So phase shift is essentially a shift from a coral dominant stage to a stage dominated by a non-coral species. So we have phase shifts happening with sponges, we have phase shifts happening with algae and few other animals. Phase shifts happening due to algae is the most common, right? Now, while phase shifts can lead to what is called as an alternate stable state, where the phase shift in itself becomes a state of its own, yeah, but it is not usually desirable because the corals are providing a disproportionately large number of ecosystem services as compared to a reef which has undergone a phase shift. And we have seen phase shifts almost across all the seas, all reef areas, the Caribbean, the Great Barrier Reef, along the Florida coast, the Mesoamerican barrier system, in some parts of Andamans also, right? And the thing with phase shifts is reversing back to a stage of coral dominance is very difficult, very, very difficult, which is why there's so much global focus on not letting this phase shift to happen. I hope that was helpful in some way.
Yeah. So there is one question from Tushar. When corals bleach, what actually happens? Is it that microalgae themselves leave the coral tissue when the temperature increases, or the algae produce some chemical substance because of which coral polyps is expelled or not?
Yeah. So the zooxanthellae, or the microalgae that's living inside the coral tissue, is very temperature specific, right? So I am not sure who expels whom or who gets expelled, but what happens in heightened temperatures is that the zooxanthellae leaves, right? there are different, so I'm also not sure because there are different ways people write it. Some people say zoos algae leave coral, some people say the coral expels out the algae. So I'm not very clear. What we know is algae leave when high temperatures sustain for a while. And yeah, but I can find out more about this and let you know.
Yeah. There is one question from Dr. Sharvari. She's asking, what are we doing to protect coral reefs? We have plenty of varieties of corals, but due to human activities like scuba, they are damaging. Who is governing this?
Yeah. So we are doing a lot to protect coral reefs on paper. Unfortunately, not much of this is translating into action, right? I strongly believe that scuba diving doesn't affect reefs because the dive community generally, at least the dive community I've seen in Andaman, is very responsible, whether it's dive schools or whether it's divers. So they restrict to the number of reefs they go. Divers are told not to touch any coral at, as much as you can avoid. So the amount of damage caused by these activities, these tourism activities, is there, but it's very minimal. Larger damage is through global warming. Larger damage is through massive emissions that are happening across all countries, right? So things like scuba diving are things we can control, and a lot of efforts are going in, and a lot of that has also translated in action, right? Corals are protected as part of the Wildlife Protection Act and the Coastal Regulatory Zone. Any project happening in coral reefs needs special permissions. There needs to be a impact assessment study done, and only then can proposals for development be forwarded. The dive community or the tourism community is becoming more and more responsible. We are trying to remove the initiatives which are trying to remove the amount of plastic and pollution that is there in the ocean. But all these problems are dwarfed in comparison to global warming. So if we are to conserve reefs, we have to have very strong checks on the emissions that we have. And countries like India, which are traditionally dependent on reef resources or any natural resource, can actually form very strong ideals about how development can be balanced without affecting the environment, because that is what we've been doing traditionally, right? We don't need to copy models of developed countries. We can create our own climate efficient models. But yeah, many things to do and not much being done.
There is one question from Karthik. How do corals act as primary producers? Do marine animals also use them for feeding other than for shelter and breeding?
Yes. So we have animal groups like butterfly fish and some kind of parrotfishes which directly feed on the coral tissue, right? Now, parrotfishes in particular are known to remove large chunks of the coral skeleton as they feed, and they take in or keep in only either the algae part or the coral polyps, but they secrete all the calcium carbonate that they've consumed. So a lot of white sand that we see, if anyone's gone to the Andamans, a lot of white sand we see there is actually parrotfish poop, right? It is because of the amount of feeding of parrotfish and the sediment that has passed through the digestive systems that we have, white sand on our beaches. So yes, which is why corals form primary producers. A lot of animals directly depend on them.
There is one question from Nishant. He's asking, you mentioned that corals attach themselves to substratum. We also know that many species look like corals and seabed. Okay. Has it been seen that they have attached themselves to a living being which camouflages with the surroundings and look like a substrate?
So I don't know if I get your question correctly, but if you're talking about non-coral species attaching to the coral bottom, then yes, we have a lot of these animals which are known to bore inside live corals. They are called boring animals, right? Not boring. Anyway, so we have clams, we have worms, we have oysters, we have sponges, which are known to compete with corals for space or even bore into them. and those animals are generally very colorful, right? So if you see things like giant clam or fire oyster, is it, or a honeycomb oyster, they're very colorful, like merging into the coral surroundings. So yeah, it's hard to mistake them for coral, but they do look very colorful.
Yeah, and I guess there is one today's last question. How much is the dependent rate of different marine species on corals?
So there are species which are directly dependent on it for habitat, food, and breeding, right? These are the species we call reef dependent species. They include, like a lot of photos that I showed, these are all strongly reef dependent species. So for them, coral reefs are almost 100% important for their survival. There can be other species which we find around coral reefs but are not entirely dependent. Fish like trevallies, or some sharks, some kingfish, barracuda, which are found in reef areas, but they could potentially survive even in non-coral reef habitats as well. So that yeah. So it of course differs drastically, but some species have a very high dependence, some are remotely dependent.
Yeah, and there are two more
Sir,
questions
while
after this.
explaining sexual reproduction, you explained that the gametes are thrown into the sea, and then there is a synchronous
Spawning.
secretion, spawning, yeah, of the many species at one time. So how did it help? I think means isn't that they get intermixed with the species?
Sorry. So many colonies of the same species is what I meant to say. Sorry if I said many species. It's the same species, but many colonies which are known to to carry out synchronous spawning. And what synchronous spawning does is generally increases the number of gametes that you have in the water column. So that indirectly increases the chances of male and female gametes combining. But we also know of hybridization happening in certain species, right? So a same genus, but different species between the same genus are also known to breed. It is very new. There's hardly any studies which document it, but it has been observed, but not at a genera level, only at a species level. Yeah.
There are a lot of ports along the west coast of India. How do ports affect coral reefs?
So different ways, right? One is during construction, there's a lot of sediment, a lot of other effluents that goes inside ports. That affects coral reefs. Ports automatically have a lot more amount of pollution, either through things like garbage or plastic and so on, and also due to oil spills. Yeah, so they can affect coral reefs in the nearby area in different ways. But interestingly, we also know of some species of corals which are actually on the port walls. If you look closely, you will find coral species, you will find fish in those areas. So highly opportunistic species also use these as substrates to grow. But in the larger scheme of things, definitely different ways in which ports or any kind of construction can affect coral reefs.
Yeah, there is one question which is not related to coral reefs, which Anand asked it. What exactly is luminescence, which we see sometimes on the sea waves?
Yeah. So I might be wrong, but I hope I'm right. So luminescence is seen in some kinds of plankton, which are microscopic animals or plants, and mostly it's from the species called Noctiluca, right? So whenever there is a bloom of Noctiluca, bloom happens due to different reasons, right? It could be eutrophication, that is excessive pollution, or also due to natural reasons. Whenever there's a bloom of Noctiluca, and the action of waves, the point where waves are breaking, the physics, yeah, that point is where wherever there is physical disturbance, in this case in the form of waves, that is where the noctiluca can emit bioluminescence. So even if you are going from in a boat, there is a chance that that disturbance can also lead to bioluminescence. But I would suggest reading and not entirely trusting what I'm saying.
Yes. So I guess I'll ask the last question because nobody asked anything about it. What are resilient and non-resilient corals?
Resilient corals are corals which have a better chance of surviving in the current climatic scenario, right? So they might be resilient to higher temperatures. They might have a better chance of recruitment and recovery, and so on. Whereas there are some species which are very fragile, very sensitive, which won't potentially, grow. So the whole concept of resilience is mostly for a system. It is not for individual species of corals. We talk about resilient systems, so different ways in which we can make an entire system more resilient by managing fisheries, reducing pollution, reducing sediment, and so on. But of course, the rates of resilience also differ between species.
Yeah. So
You mean super
thanks.
corals? You mentioned once.
Super corals, yeah, but yeah, something on those lines.
So yeah, thanks a lot, Tanmay, for
Thanks
this
for
lovely
asking
session.
this.
Yeah, and thank you all for attending these sessions. We'll be coming with more sessions in this lockdown period. So be in touch with us. You saw our slide for donations, so no money is less for us. If it's possible for you, you can donate money. We'll put the details on our WhatsApp group. And thank you again. Thank you all.
Slide again. Yeah.
Yeah, no need. We'll put that in WhatsApp group. Yeah. So yes, thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Tanmay.
Thanks for asking me to give this presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.